A quiet heart in the city of fog. Gera, a 19-year-old girl, had moved to the misty city of Dalat a few months ago to begin her first year as a student of pedagogy. While others marveled at the city's beauty, lush green hills, cascading waterfalls, and the crisp highland air, Gelat had almost found herself lost in longing and reminiscence. Her heart felt heavy with the sacrifices her mother had made, and the distance between them only deepened. The chill of the night air flowed constantly on the air. Anne grew up in a small village in southern Vietnam, where endless plains stretched out and rivers meandered gently. Her mother, nearly 50, but appearing older due to a life of hardship, was a thin yet resilient woman. Every morning, long before dawn, she would wake up to prepare sticky rice to sell at the market. The modest earnings from her work barely sustained their simple life, but were enough to save a portion for Anne's education. Her father had abandoned the family when she was just 4, leaving no trace. From that moment on, her mother became both a father and a mother, her smile never faltering, despite the burdens she bore. Anne chose to study pedagogy, not out of passion, but because students in this field were exempt from tuition fees. She wanted to ease her mother's financial burden, knowing how tireless she worked to support her. Every time Anne thought of her mother, rising in the early hours, working long days under the scorching sun, or during unexpected rain showers, her heart ached with guilt and yearning. In Dalat, Anne lived in a small rented room with faded walls and a single window overlooking a narrow alley. At night, the sound of rain tapping on the tin roof often brought back memories of her childhood. She would sit by the window, clutching a warm cup of tea, silently watching the raindrops dance under the streetlights. Memories of rainy mornings in her hometown flooded back. Times when she and her mother would sit in their tiny house, sharing warmth and stories. Now, the thought of her mother braving the morning cold, her hands red from working with sticky rice, filled Anne with a deep sense of worry. Her mother's arms, particularly the right one, had begun to ache severely in recent years from constant work. A neighbor had suggested wrapping ginger around the arm to ease the pain, but the relief was only temporary. In every letter she wrote, Anne would always ask about her mother's arm, her heart heavy with concern. Anne often wondered about the rainy mornings back home. On days like this, could Mom sell all her sticky rice? Would she have to sit until late, hoping to sell the last packets? Or would she have to bring the unsold rice home to eat instead of a proper meal? These thoughts saddened her, but also fueled her determination to work harder each day. Every week, her mother would write her a letter by hand and walk to the post office to send it, as she didn't know how to use email. These letters, filled with encouragement and simple reminders, like wearing warm clothes or eating enough, were Anne's lifeline to home. She cherished them, rereading them whenever the ache of homesickness became unbearable. Without a mobile phone, Anne occasionally went to the post office to make brief calls to her mother. The lines were often poor, and many words were lost in static, but hearing her mother's voice, even for just a few seconds, was enough to warm her heart. Before ending each call, Anne always reminded her mother to take care of herself, wear warm clothes, and carry a raincoat when bad weather was forecast. Though Dalat was stunningly beautiful, it felt lonely for Anne. The mist that blanketed the city each morning mirrored the sadness she carried within her. The winding streets and charming little cafes, instead of comforting her, only deepened her sense of isolation. On quiet evenings, she would wander through the empty streets, her footsteps echoing in the stillness. A cool breeze would often sweep by, making her shiver and pull her coat tighter as she thought of her mother's warm embrace. One dark night, as Anne walked home from the library, the city seemed quieter than usual. Street lights cast faint beams through the mist, and a light drizzle began to fall. She stopped at a dimly lit corner and noticed a middle-aged woman sitting by a small, sticky rice cart. The woman wore a thin coat, her hands clasped tightly around herself for warmth, and her face bore the fatigue of a long day. The sight made Anne pause and look on for a while. The woman's weary expression reminded her of her mother. Tears welled up in Anne's eyes as she thought of the struggles of mothers like hers, quietly enduring hardships to give their children a chance at a better life. In that moment, Anne resolved not to waste the opportunities her mother had worked so hard to provide. Mom's endured so much for me. I can't let her down, she thought, her heart swelling with renewed determination. Back in her room, Nononono opened the latest letter from her mother. In it, her mother wrote about the hot weather and how she still managed to prepare sticky rice every day. My arm still aches, but it's getting better. Don't worry about me. Just focus on your studies. As long as you do well, I'm happy. Those words were like a warm flame amid the cold of Dalat. Though separated by hundreds of kilometers, the love between mother and daughter bridged the distance. Each letter, each fleeting phone call carried the warmth of her mother's love. Her mother, no matter how tired, was always proud of her little girl. The city of Dalat, with its misty hills and tranquil pine forests, continued to embrace its cold, quiet days. In the place the letter beside her pillow, lay down and stared at the ceiling as the rain drummed softly outside. She thought of her mother, alone in their small house, likely preparing for another early morning at the market. The weight of their shared struggles bore down on her, but it also gave her strength. In the midst of the foggy city, Anne found her resolve. The beauty and melancholy of Dalat, coupled with her longing for her mother, became a source of inspiration for her to persevere, for herself and for the selfless woman who had sacrificed everything for her future. An Izod whispered a prayer for her mother, a prayer for health, peace, and the hope that one day she could bring her mother to Dalat to see the beauty she had only read about in letters. For now, despite the physical distance, the love between them remained unshakably close, an unbreakable bond connecting their hearts.
Vocabulary words with definitions and examples from the story A Quiet Heart in the City of Fog. 1. Pedagogy, the art or science of teaching and education. Example, Anne moved to Dalat to study pedagogy, aiming to ease her mother's financial burden. 2. Reminiscence, the act of recalling past experiences or memories. Example, the sound of rain often brought Anne into a state of reminiscence about her childhood. 3. Highland, an area of elevated land, often with cooler weather and scenic views. Example, the crisp highland air of Dalat contrasted with the warmth of Anne's hometown. 4. Resilient, able to recover quickly from difficulties or challenges. Example, despite her hardships, Anne's mother remained resilient and hardworking. 5. Modest, simple, and humble in character or lifestyle. Example, Anne's mother's modest earnings were enough to sustain their basic needs and save for her education. 6. Meander, to wander or wind in a leisurely or winding way. Example, rivers meandered gently through Anne's small village in southern Vietnam. 7. Burden, a heavy load, often referring to emotional or financial strain. Example, Anne chose pedagogy to ease the financial burden on her mother. 8. Faltering, becoming weak or losing strength. Example, her mother's smile never faltered despite the many challenges she faced. 9. Aching, a continuous or prolonged dull pain. Example, Anne's mother suffered from an aching arm due to her years of hard work. 10. Homesickness, a longing for one's home during absence. Example, Anne's homesickness deepened as she missed her mother's warm embrace. 11. Fleeting, lasting for a very short time. Example, even a fleeting phone call with her mother brought in great comfort. 12. Melancholy, a feeling of deep sadness or gloom. Example, the misty mornings in Dalat often filled Anne with melancholy. 13. Persevere, to continue doing something despite difficulties or challenges. Example, inspired by her mother's sacrifices, Anne was determined to persevere in her studies. 14. Tranquil, peaceful, and calm. Example, the tranquil pine forests of Dalat contrasted with Anne's inner turmoil. 15. Unshakable, firm, and unwavering, unable to be disturbed or changed. Example, the love between Anne and her mother was unshakable, despite the distance between them. Phrases with definitions and examples from the story A Quiet Heart in the City of Fog. 1. Lost in longing, deeply immersed in feelings of yearning or desire. Example, Anne often found herself lost in longing for her mother and childhood home. 2. Barely sustained, hardly able to maintain or support something. Example, her mother's earnings barely sustained their modest lifestyle. 3. Fuel her determination, to strengthen or motivate one's resolve. Example, thoughts of her mother's sacrifices fueled Anne's determination to succeed. 4. Warm flame, amid the cold, something comforting in an otherwise harsh or sad situation. Example, her mother's letters were like a warm flame amid the cold of Dalat. 5. Bridged the distance, overcame the separation between two people or places. Example, the letters and phone calls bridged the distance between Anne and her mother. 6. endured hardships, persisted through difficult times or challenges. Example, her mother endured hardships to give him a chance at a better life. 7. Mirror the sadness to reflect or represent sorrow or melancholy. Example, the mist that blanketed daylight each morning seemed to mirror Anne's sadness. 8. Unbreakable bond, a connection that cannot be broken or severed. Example, despite the distance, Anne and her mother shared an unbreakable bond. 9. Pulled her coat tighter, a physical gesture symbolizing the need for warmth or comfort. Example, Anne pulled her coat tighter as she walked through the misty streets. 10. Drummed softly outside, the gentle, rhythmic sound of something, often rain. Example, the rain drummed softly outside, bringing back memories of home for Anne.